comes to us, God seeks us, God speaks to us, but God will not make us do what we're unwilling to do. Makes no sense to say no to God. But then you notice the wonderful truth. When we do turn toward home, God gives us far more than we deserve. God gives us far more than we ask. You remember the young man? He was fed up with home. He didn't want anybody telling him whether he could pierce his ears, whether he could not shave or cut his hair. Nobody to tell him or her what to wear. He was going to be free. What he actually said to his dad was drop dead, because he asked for his inheritance before the death of his father. Now, I'd like to know more about the conversation that went on, wouldn't you? But finally, the father gave him his inheritance, and he went off to a far country and wasted his substance in riotous living. And I imagine he had a ball for a while, don't you? Stay up late as you want, watch any TV program you want, don't have to go to church, don't have to go to school, make friends wherever you want to, and boy, friends are available when you got money. I don't know whether he was in London or New York or Chattanooga, but in the middle of the ball, the music stopped. And he ran out of money. He blew it all. Not only that, just as he blew it, there was a recession. There was a famine. And this Jewish boy, and I want you to notice this Jewish boy who was going to be free is now so desperate that he hires himself out to slop hogs. Now, Carolyn was from the city, and she didn't like for me to talk about slopping hogs. That didn't sound very upstanding. But I bet some of you slopped hogs. You remember how you collected in a dishpan, the old dirty dishwater? You'd have corn cobs and peelings off of potatoes and the ends off of carrots and anything you could accumulate, and then you heated it up and you took it out and dumped it in the trough, and those old muddy pigs just dived in. Can you imagine being hungry enough to eat slop? The pods given to the hogs. That's freedom, isn't it? Do what you want. But then there's the most interesting phrase. It said he came to himself. And he remembered, as bad as things were at home, at least everybody there had enough to eat and to spare. So he decided to go home. And he wrote a speech. Father, I've sinned against you in heaven. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me a hired servant. And he started home. And it said that the father spotted him afar off. Now, how do you think he spotted him afar off? Don't you suppose he'd been out every day looking and praying and hoping? And then it says he ran to him. Now, Jewish elders don't run. Didn't run in that society. That was undignified. But he ran. He may have run to save his son's life. Because if the village had gotten hold of him first, they would have stoned him to death. Because he had not only insulted his father, he had insulted the village. So the father ran and threw his arms around him, and the son began to make his speech. Father, I've sinned against heaven. No longer worthy to be called your son. Make me a hired servant. And what did the father do? Well, son, you know, I tried to tell you, and you wouldn't listen. No. He cried out, bring forth the best robe, and put it on him, and a ring for his finger, and shoes for his feet. He wanted to be a slave, a servant. Slaves didn't wear shoes. Slaves didn't have rings. Slaves didn't have the finest robe. What the Father is saying is, you wanted to be a slave. You're my son. And I not only will feed you, I'll not only forgive you, but I will restore you to a place of honor as my son. What do you need? What are you asking for? God is more eager to give than you are to receive. Now there's a postlude, and it may be the point of the story. The older son who'd stayed to work, stayed on the farm, tended the orchard, looked after the cattle, he heard noise. Hadn't been that kind of noise in a while. There was a party going on. And he said, what's the problem here? And the servant said, why, your brother's come home. And they've killed a fatted calf. That was the most special way for a celebration. Had to have at least 35 people for a fatted calf. But he wouldn't even admit that this was his brother. When the father came out to this self-righteous one, he said, son, everything I have is yours. It was right that we make feast for your brother. Not my son, your brother. But as the story ends, the righteous son is outside. And I wonder how many of the righteous sons and daughters today in the church are really outside. They're inside, but they're shaking their head. They don't like what's going on. They don't want riffraff coming around here. They don't want to be reminded of what it means to be a disciple. But if we're willing to come home, if we're willing to join the party, God gives us far more than we could ever ask or think. Where are you today? You outside? Are you inside saying, Lord, I'm unworthy. Do with me what you will, only to hear, bring forth the best robe. Put a ring on her finger and shoes on her feet. Thanks be to God. That God can not only be trusted, but that God can be loved and embraced. Now let me end with a slight admonition. I'm looking forward to this week. I do love to preach. The gospel is such good news. But I love a week like this because it reminds me of who I am and who God is. And thinking together in 5 services about the goodness of God draws me closer. It helps me be a better Christian. And I know your lives are busy. I know you've got a lot of things you'd like to do. But do yourself a favor. Spend these next 4 times, these next 4 nights, gathered at the banquet of God's love. Don't come because you ought to. Don't come because you promised to support the church. Come because you're hungry for the goodness of God. And God will feed your hunger. God will expand your life. And I look forward to sharing with you at God's table as we meet together. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your presence. Come home. Come home. Ye who are weary, come home. Amen.
We want to stand.